We're going to learn Daf Chav Dalid, and we're going to start from the Gemara. Yesterday we did the Mishnah, and the Mishnah is all about what's called Mechutzar Tzeda. In other words, there's an animal or a bird, but you haven't yet captured it. So if it wasn't captured before Yontif, then it's not Muchan, and it's Mukta. So the Gemara says, after you've told me that the exception to the rule is Chayavi Of Hanisunim Bebivar. If you closed up this pool or any sort of an area which is enclosed, and that was enclosed on Erev Yontif, then there's no Tzeda. And if the animal or the bird was caught on Erev Yontif in such an enclosed space, it's already considered mitod, it's already captured, and there's hachana. And when you take it to Shechten on Yontif, you're not violating neither muktzah nor meleches tzeda. But the Gemara asks the following question: what are we going to do with a contradictory brisa? Beivarim shel chayav shalofas ein sadeh mehem b'yontif. The brisa establishes that if you have these enclosed areas like pools, or they have out in the fields sort of an enclosed area, and you're not allowed to take the bird or the chaya, the animal, from that area on Yontif. They nosin of them bezonos, and you're not allowed to feed the chaya or the oaf on Yontif. And now we have a double kasha. Kasha chaya achaya, kasha ofos haofos. On the one hand, our Mishnah says that you're allowed to capture on Yontif the chaya, the oaf that is in the bivar, and you're allowed to feed them as well. The Bryce on the other hand says you're not allowed to capture them on Yontif from the bivar, and you're not allowed to feed them. So the Gemara says, wait a minute, there's another brisa. Actually, it's a Mishnah that records a machlok between Rabbi Yehuda and Chachamim regarding the case of the chaya. So the Gemara says now, Bishlem chaya chaya lo kasha ha Rabbi Yehuda veha Rabbanan. As we'll soon see, based on a Mishnah at the end of Masechet Shabbos, Rabbi Yehuda is going to be machmir and take the more strict position with regard to tzeda of a chaya from these enclosed areas called the Bevarim. However, the Rabbanon, as recorded in the Mishnah in Shabbos, have a more lenient opinion. They were matir capturing the chaya from the bivar on Yontif. Tisnan, we learned in the Mishnah, and there will be two categories in the Mishnah. There'll be birds and there'll be chaya, animals. With regard to birds, there's no machlokas. Rabbi Yehuda Omer atzad tzipar lemigdal. If you chase a bird into an enclosed migdal, a migdal is like a closet made of wood that has no windows. So there's no way that the bird can get free, can fly out through the windows. Or tzvi labayis, or you chase an animal and lock it up in a house. Now notice, in the case of a bird, locking it up in a house is not going to be sufficient to generate a chiyuv tzeda. The bird is still free within the house. You have to lock up the bird in a place where a closed closet that has no windows, so that the bird cannot fly this way or that way. In the case of a chaya, if you trap the animal into a house and lock it into the house, despite the fact that there are windows, you're still considered chaya for tzeda. You've captured the animal. And that's what the Gemara is medaik. Alabayis hu d'mechayev, avol beivarim lo. In other words, a tzvi, which is a classic case of a chaya, a deer, is not considered captured in a bivar, because the Mishnah says that you're only chayav at seidah if you capture the tzvi in a house. You lock up the deer in a house. By the way, I have a first cousin in Edison, New Jersey, that had a deer that actually went into the house. Unfortunately, the deer did not see the glass, and it went straight into the glass. But this is kind of it sounds like an imagination that a deer you'd find the deer inside a house, or you capture the deer in a house. But I'm just telling you, chayu dvar ma'olam. So you're only chayav at seidas tzvi when the tzvi is locked up in the house. But if it's in an enclosed area, bivar, lo, that's not considered nitzot. That's not considered as if you captured it. Because within the bivar, there's a lot of room for the animal to jump around and hide in different corners. Chachamim omrim, they agree with Rabbi Yehuda's statement about a bird, sipar lemigdal, that you're only chayav if the bird goes into an enclosed closet, like a wooden closet, which is called a migdal, and it has no windows. But tzvi, here's where they disagree with Rabbi Yehuda: legina ulechotzer ulebeivarim. If you take a tzvi and you chase it into an enclosed area like the courtyard, which has mechitzos around it, or, for example, a gina. A gina is a garden, and he has an enclosure around the garden, or a bivar, as we said before, these areas that are closed off. And according to the Chachamim, if you chase the tzvi into such an area, then even though the tzvi still has some measure of movement, of freedom of movement, nevertheless it's considered nitzot, because the tzvi is not going to be able to get loose since the area is enclosed. And here's where the Chacham disagree with Rabbi Yehuda, that a tzvi is considered nitzot, meaning it's subject to tzeidah in those closed areas. Rabbi Yehuda, in the case of chaya, in a bivar, he holds that since within the bivar there's a lot of room for the animal to move from one corner to the other and hide here and hide there, it's not considered nitzot. And the good news is then you're not chayav at seidah. The bad news is then it's on Yontif, it's going to be usher to shecht such an animal because the animal was not captured. So let's just summarize that the brisa that we quoted reflects the shita of Rabbi Yehuda, because the brisa says that bevarim shel chaya ain't sodomehem b'yontif, whereas our Mishnah permitted seidah on yontif from a bevar. And you could say the following, that our Mishnah reflects the shita of the Chachamim with regard to chaya, that a chaya, according to the Chachamim, is tzvi legina lechotza lebivar chaya. That once you get the animal locked up in a bivar, that's already considered seidah. So therefore, on Yontif, you're allowed to take the chaya out of the bivar because it's already considered captured. Whereas the brisa that establishes that ain't sodomeh b'yontif, in the case of a chaya and a bivar, that reflects the shita of Rabbi Yehuda. So we have now managed to reconcile the apparent contradiction between our Mishnah and the brisa with regard to chaya. And that means, as we said before, that the brisa reflects the shita of Yehuda, whereas the Mishnah, the Rabbanan. Ela ofos ha-ofos kasha. Both the Chachamim and Rabbi Yehuda agree that when you have a bird in a house, it's not considered nitzot. And how much more so in a bivar, which is even a wider area, it's not considered nitzo. How then can our Mishnah permit on Yontif, excuse me, to take the oath and capture it from a bivar? Maybe you'll suggest the following answer. Our Mishnah that allows taking a bird that's in a bivar is talking about the bivar makura. There's a roof, a korah, a roof. And since there's a roof, the bird cannot fly out on top. It's already considered nitzot. It's not mechusat seidah. Therefore, you're allowed to take it on yontif. But the Beitza says you're not allowed to take an oath and capture it from a bivar. B'vevar she'eina makura. It's open on top, and therefore the bird could easily fly out of the top. There's no roof. And here there's a long discussion in the commentaries as to why the Beitza had to tell me that if there's no roof on top, the bird is not considered captured. Obviously, the bird is not stupid. It'll fly out of the top. And one of the answers that's offered, which I think is going to become a little bit clearer later on in this sugya, is that the Beitza is referring to ophos, those kinds of birds that are either naturally or artificially trained, that at night they go into the coop. And since that's what they do on a daily basis, then you might think that they're not going to fly out of the top because they're waiting for nightfall, and then they go into the coop. That's where they find food and so forth and so on. Kamashmal, no, it's not considered seder because they can fly out of the top. So the Gemara rejects this. Why? For a bias, the kebevar mekora dami, ubein l'Rabbi Yehuda bein l'Rabbanan tzipol l'migdol in l'bayis lo. You can't possibly justify a situation of bias makura as being mitzod simply because there's a roof on top of the bevar, because even in the case of a bias, we say that the bird is capable of eluding you by flying from one corner to the other. You'll never get a hold of this bird. So it's not nitzon. How much more so in the case of a bird in a bivar, where there's even more space for the bird to fly around and avoid getting captured. And certainly you should not be chayav at seder if you trap the bird into a bevar. So once again, we're stuck with that question. How could our Mishnah allow you on Yontiv to take this bird from a bevar? If you're not allowed to take a bird from a bias, then certainly not from a bevar. And here the Gemara is going to present a particular shita of Rabba Barafuna, and that is that our Mishnah that allows you to capture a bird in a bivar, you're talking about a bivar makura, and if you ask the question from our Mishnah, from the Mishnah at the end of Masechet Shabbos that we quoted earlier, that Sipar, everybody, both Rabbi Yehuda and the Chacham agree, it's not considered nitod, even in the case of a bias, which certainly has a roof on top. Hacha, the Mishnah in Shabbos is talking about Sipar Draras Kinon, She'ena Mekabelis Morus. This is a bird that finds itself a habitat, Draras Miloshin Dira, wherever you put it, and the bird is not considered captured. It's not Mekabelis Morus. It cannot be domesticated. There's no way that you could train this bird. And therefore, it will always fly from one corner to the other, even within a house. And it's not considered Seder, even if you were able to, so to speak, push the bird into a house. And the Gemara now quote the Beitza to support this concept called a tzipar drawer. The Tana de Bei Rabbi Yishmael, Lama Nikra Shma tzipar drawer, Shedara bebayis kibesada. For this bird, it's no difference whether it resides out in the open area, in open fields, or even in a house. The bird always feels secure. It always rebels against any effort to try to domesticate it. And it will fly from one corner to the other, even within a bias. That's called a tzipar drawer. But other birds, when you find them in a bivar makura, that's considered nitzod v'omed. And that's what our mission is talking about, that allowed you on Yantif to take the bird from a bivar makura, because we weren't talking about a tzipar drawer. We were talking about other birds that are captured and considered nitzod in a bivar makura. So the Gemara says, wait a minute. If that's the way you're going in order to reconcile the Mishnah and the Beitza, then let's go back to the drawing board. In the case of Chaya, we had a contradiction between the Mishnah and the Beitza. We said, you know what? It's a machlokas shin Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. You know, the Mishnah and the Beitza reflect respectively Rabbi Yehuda and the Chachamim. Why do you have to go that way? Who wants to reconcile something by saying it's a machlokas and it's two different shitos? That's dachuk. Hashta diosas lahachi achaya nami lokash. I can give you a much simpler answer to reconcile the steer between the Mishnah and the Beitza about the status of a chaya to bivar. Why? Ha bebevar katan, veha bebevar gadol. Our Mishnah is talking about a case of tzeidas chaya mi bivar katan, and if it's a small bivar, then there's not much room for the chaya to avoid capture. You know, it's a small area, very enclosed. Whereas the Beitza that says you're not allowed to take a chaya and capture it from a bivar, that's a bivar gadol. So the Gemara asks, Heichi dami bivar gadol, heichi dami bivar katan. How do you differentiate between these two? Omer Rav Ashi, kol heicha de royet abasra, umati la bechad shichya, bivar katan. V'idach bivar gadol. So the first possible distinction between bivar katan, where it's already considered nitzor, in contrast to bivar gadol, is whether or not you can capture it with one ritza. Ritza means you run, and you don't even have to stop to take a breath, and you capture it. That's called a bivar katan, and the animal, since it can be easily captured, is already considered nitzor. Inami, I'll give you another possible way of differentiating between a bivar gadol and a bivar katan, according to Rav Ashi. Kol heicha deika ukzi bivar gadol, ve'idach bivar katan. Ukzi means that there are corners and there's plenty of room in the little corners for an animal to hide and avoid capture of human being. That's called a bivar gadol, and the animal is not captured. But a bivar katan means that there are no corners. You know, it's like a rectangle or a square. Inami, a third possible way of differentiating, you have the two walls of the bivar, and when the sun rises, there's going to be a shade from the sun from one wall that falls onto the other wall. That's how narrow of an area it is. The idach, but if you won't see the shade of one wall on the other wall, because the two walls are wide apart, that's called a bivar gadol. Now, if you take a look at the top Tosfos on Daf Chav Daled, he says, "V'shir hoylem gova b'ksolim shel bivrim." There was a standard set height because Tosfos is bothered, you could have a very wide area, but if the walls are very tall, then it could be there'll be shade from one wall to the other because of the height of the walls. Tosfos says there was a standard height for the walls of a biva. Mishnah says, Reb Shimon Gamliel Omer lo kol ha'bevrin shavin. You cannot put together in one uniform category all bevarim. There are some bevarim that are mechusa tzeda, and you're not allowed to capture it on Yontif. There are others that are already considered nitzod, and it's mutter to capture it on Yontif. Omer Rabbi Yosef, Omer Rabbi Yehuda, Omer Shmuel, halacha ki Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel. Now, whenever you see halacha ki, you know that there's a previous machlokas. Amalei Abaye. Abaye turns to Rabbi Yosef. Halacha michlal de pligi? I don't see any machlokas here. Do the Chachamim disagree with Rabbi Shimon Gamliel? Do they deny that there's a difference between one bevar and another? One is mechusa tzeda, one is not a mechusa tzeda. We had Rav Ashi who gave us three distinctions between a bevar gadol and a bevar katan. One is mutter, one is asa. So how can you tell me that the Chacham would disagree with Rabbi Shimon's statement of lo kol bevrim shavin? Of course, lo kol bevrim shavin. So Rabbi Yosef was a little bit put back by the question of Abaye. Umay naftalach mina. What do you lose by the fact that I said halacha ki Rabbi Shimon Gamliel? You're telling me that there's no machlokas between the Chacham and Rabbi Shimon Gamliel. Okay. So you're going to pass like Rabbi Shimon Gamliel no matter how you slice the cake, because the Chacham never disagreed with it. Amalei, Sabai responded with an idiomatic phrase, like a simile. Gemara, Gemar, Zmorsa, Tehe. When we study Gemara, we're not interested in Mainaf Gemino. We want to know, what is the correct answer? So when you teach Torah, teach it as emes, not full of mistakes. And even if there's no difference, as the lawyers would say, it doesn't cut ice. But nevertheless, Yelachol is zemer l'shir. It should be like song and hymns, and it should reflect the truth. So don't tell me halacha Rav Shimon Gamliel when nobody disagreed with Rav Shimon Gamliel. Now, Rav Shimon Gamliel says, Zakal kol hamachusa tzeda also, v'shein machusa tzeda mutter. Hechi dami machusa tzeda. Now, this Gemara is very odd. What do you mean, Hechi dami machusa tzeda? Rav Ashi gave us three differentiations between a bivar katan, where it's already nitzod, and a bivar gadol. Why is Gemara going back to home plate, to square one, as we say, to ask Hechi dami machusa tzeda? It all depends on what the bivar was. So amongst the various answers to explain the Gemara's question, Hechi dami, I'm going to mention just one of them. What we're about to learn is a statement of Shmuel. Originally, the three distinctions were offered by Rav Ashi. Ein shiuro shel Shmuel ki shiuro shel Rav Ashi. What we're about to learn is different than Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi was explaining the Shitas Chachamim, and Shmuel was explaining Reb Shimon Gamliel. And if you accept this answer, which is presented in a book called Shita Mekubetzes of Rabbi Betzal Ashkenazi, then you realize that he understood that there is a difference between the Chacham and Reb Shimon Gamliel. Tosfos, on the other hand, in the second Tosfos, presents a different thesis, and he writes that the shiurim of Rav Ashi are shiurim of a bivar for a chaya, And what we're going to learn now in the name of Shmuel is the shear of a bivar for ophos, for birds. Omer Rav Yosef, Omer Yehuda, Omer Shmuel, Kol She'omer. When the trappers, the hunters, are ready to go hunting, and we have to gather our hunting tools, our instruments, Omer makes a declaration, Havei Mitzuda, bring me the trap so that I can trap this bird. Unitzudena. If that be the case, if they have to announce we need our traps, then you know that they're working hard to capture the bird, and it's in a state of mechusa tzeda. Abai turns to Rav Yosef again with a dissenting argument. Ba'avazim, tarnagolim, when you have ducks or chickens in your backyard, sha'omrim, and one person says to the other, Havei mitzudo nutzudena, let's get a trap and let's capture it. Beside you, we learned to the Braysa, Tzod avazim v'tarnagolim v'yoneyaha midisios. These are domesticated pigeons or doves, potter. So you see that even though one person turns to the other and he says, let's capture these ducks, nevertheless, they're already considered captured. And you're telling me that if he says, Havei mitzuda nitzudena, then it's not considered capture. Omar Rabba Barafun Omar Shmuel, I have an answer to this question. There's a difference between avazim and tarnagolim on the one hand and other animals on the other hand. Halalu, what's unique about these ducks and chickens is boim lekluvam le'erev. At night, they come on their own volition to kluvim. Kluvan means that you build a little coop, like a basket, a large basket, and you put food in there, and that's where they come and they set up their nest. And it's very easy to capture them. And even if they leave their kluv, they're still considered captured, and you're allowed to capture them. Because you know that it's a matter of time until sunset, and they will gravitate back into the kluv. Valolu, but with regard to other animals, ain't boim lekluvam be'erev. They are not trained in such a way that they gravitate towards the coop at night, and therefore they're not considered nitod. So again, the Gemara objects. These are various kinds of pigeons and doves that find themselves a coop, or they go up to the roof, and that's where they set up their nests. And these are relatively domesticated doves, and they gravitate towards the kluv at night. And nevertheless, Vitanya, we learned in the Braysa, Tzad Yonei Shav Yonei Aliyah, B'tziparim Shekidenu B'tfichin. Tfichin are earthenware pots, small pots, and they leave them biros in the walls of very large biros, are like palaces, very large structures, and that's where the doves gravitate and they set up their nests. Chayav. Wait a second. Why am I chayav in this case? You just told me that they are boim l'kluvam be'erev, and if they're boim l'kluvam be'erev, they flock back to their coops at night. Then it's already considered nitzah. Why is he chayav here? Elomar Rabba Barafun Amar Shmuel. Halalu, these ducks and chickens, boim l'kluvam le'erev ve mizonosan olecha. Since they come into the kluv at night, you're the owner, you're responsible to feed them. And even by day, it's very easy to capture them at the time that you feed them. So this is a category called the behema, birshuso. He has the animal in his domain, and it's not mechusa seder. But halal, the case of Yonei Shevach and Yonei Aliyah, that fly up and fly down, boim lekluv be'erev the aim is onosavol, but you don't feed them. They will on their own fly to seek out food. And therefore, it's not going to be easy to capture them, at least not during the daytime. And therefore, even at night, when they gravitate towards the kluv, still haven't captured them. He writes here in the footnote in the name of the Tosus Rid, Shalo Yehe Elikamotse Kain Besada. He finds a nest out in the fields. Shafal Pisha Holech Balayla, even though he can stealthily surprise the birds at night. V'tofes hatziparim shabo chayav mishum tzad. Why? Because Kaven shebayom enam kinitzodim him. So if during the day they're not considered captured, then even at night you are chayav for capturing. Rav Mari Omar, he offers an alternative distinction. Hani, these cases of Yonei Shovach and Yonei Aliyah, even though they come to the kluv at night, avide lirabuye. They have a way of avoiding capture. They run away from a human being. And therefore, they're not considered mitzvot. And if you declare hava mitzuda, let's bring the traps, that's considered seder v'hani. But in the case of the chickens and the ducks, lo avide lirabuye, they don't run away from you. It's much more easy to capture them because they come into the kluv at night. So the Gemara asks, "Kula nami avidi levuya." That's not true. What are you talking about? You move towards a duck or a chicken, and it comes towards you. You just capture it. That's not so. Even a duck or a chicken will avoid capture and run away from a human being. So Mar explains, "Lekluvam kamrina davidi levuya." What Rav Mari really had in mind when he made his distinction is that in the case of Yonei Shavach and Yonei Aliyah, they avoid you even for the kluv. And if you come and try to grab them, they run away from you. They fly away from you. But in the case of a duck or a chicken, when they're inside the kluv, they don't usually run away from you. They're easily captured. And here we'll take a look at the Mishnah. Mitzudos chayav ofid dagim shason me'erev yontif. What happens if he sets up traps to catch animals or birds on erev yontif, and on yontif he finds that somebody, some animal was actually captured, but he doesn't know, was it captured before yontif or on yontif? And this is called, in the language of the Gemara, safek muchan. We don't know whether it's muktzah or it's not muktzah. And the Mishnah Paskins, lo yito me'em b'yontif, elam kein yodea shenitzodu me'erev yontif. You have to be absolutely certain about the fact that this animal was captured in the trap before yontif. Otherwise, you're in a case of a safek muktzah. And a safek muktzah is also Ma'isa b'nochriyecha shehevi dogim l'ragamliel. On yontif, the guy brought fish that he had captured to Rabbi Gamliel. The Omar of Gamliel says mutarim him. According to the strict letter of the law, I'm allowed to eat this fish. It's not muktzah, because in safek muktzah is mutar. El shein ritzoni l'kabli menu. I don't want to accept a gift from a guy. So the Gemara immediately asks, Maisa Listar. I don't get it. In the Mishnah it says that you're allowed. I'm sorry. In the Reisha of the Mishnah, it says you're not allowed to eat safek muktzah, and then you quote a story to establish that Rabbi Gamliel was matir. You have to add a few words to the Mishnah. Safek muchan also. Rabbi Gamliel matir. So the Mishnah records explicitly a debate between the Tanakama and Rabbi Gamliel about safek muktzah. Umaysanami. And to prove to you that Rabbi Gamliel was matir safek muktzah, I will demonstrate this from the following episode. Nachri echad shehevi dagim l'Rav Gamliel v'yamar mutarim heim el shein ritzoni l'kabel ben. So even though he didn't know and he had no way of figuring out whether or not the guy had captured the fish before Yontif or after Yontif or during Yontif, nevertheless, Mikra then it's mutar. We pass like the Tanakama that Safek Mukta is us. And later, when we get to Chavdal Amid Beis, we'll discuss why Safek Mukta should be us. Ika Demasni Leacha. Some have the psak of Shmuel to prohibit Safek Mukhan as an addendum to a brisa, not as an addendum and a comment on our Mishnah. The Sanya we learned in the brisa, Safek Mukhan, Rabbi Gamliel Matin, Rabbi Yeshua Oseh, on Rabbi Yehuda, on Rabbi Shmuel Alachik Rabbi Yeshua. So whether or not Rabbi Yehuda, the name of Shmuel, said Ein Alacha ki Rabbi Gamliel as a comment on our Mishnah, which implies that we pass like the Tanakam that Safek Mukhan is also, or alternatively, Rabbi Yehuda or Shmuel made his comment as halachic Rabbi Yeshua in the Brisa. It all comes down to exactly the same thing, namely that Safek Mukta is us. Ika demasni le aha, and some had a version that the psak of Shmuel was addended to a different price.